Hi guys, hope you're having a good night. So I figured before I start reading the book again, I was going to show you this. This came out 2 years ago, and they actually identified another victim of Herb Baumeister. So let's watch.
Today, another major step forward in the investigation into what happened at the Fox Hollow Farm in Westfield nearly 30 years ago.
The Hamilton County coroner today reported the identification of another man whose remains were found at the former home of suspected serial killer Herb Baumeister. WRTV's Rachel Wilkerson reports. It's been 30 years since Alan Livingston's family last heard from him.
Every time I see that sign, it's just it's hard to explain. Like I feel it's like dread. I believe these victims are still there running for their life. I really do.
The Hamilton County Coroner's Office says it was his family that sparked the mission to identify more remains found here at Fox Hollow Farm so that more families can finally find closure.
It was a family member from the Livingston family that called me that said that he thought his cousin was a victim at Fox Hollow and that Alan Livingston, his cousin, his mother had terminal cancer, and he was hoping to be able to give her some closure.
Alan Livingston was reported missing from Indianapolis in the summer of 1993. He was 27 years old. On Tuesday, the Hamilton County Coroner's Office confirmed a DNA sample from Livingston's mother matches the DNA of a human bone that was found at the property previously owned by accused serial killer Herb.
Like, look at him. He is creepy as hell. I'm glad this family got closure. It's been, what do you say, 30 years?
Baumeister.
How do you balance that emotionally? You know, there were high fives yesterday, but we quickly realized the stark reality was we have another victim. That's 16 people. I really think that this case ranks up there with some of the most horrific serial killings in the United States.
Baumeister is suspected of
Holy
killing
shit.
dozens of men
Look at
who
that. Did you see that face? Sorry, hold on.
This ranks up there with some of the most horrific serial killings in the United States.
Baumeister is suspected.
Like, he's not right looking. Do you know what I mean? Like, he's fucking creepy. Yeah, that's creepy.
Of killing dozens of men who investigators believe he picked up in gay bars and brought back to his Westfield home. More than 10,000 bones and bone fragments were found buried throughout the Fox Hollow property.
1996, 1997, law enforcement served the search warrant on the property. Shortly after that, Herb Baumeister shot himself.
In Canada, the
We don't know
coward.
the story. But I do know that shortly after that happened, this investigation stopped. They were forgotten. They were placed on a shelf and forgotten.
That's sad.
They're no longer forgotten.
Coroner Jeff Jellison has this sign hanging up in his office, serving as a daily reminder of the missing men that have yet to be identified.
10,000 remains spread over 18 acres. I can't think of too many comparables in history that are larger than that.
The Livingston family helped re-spark a new push to revisit the case using modern technology.
She is looking forward to her son's remains going to a final resting place. And again, that's what this is all about.
But Jellison says his team isn't stopping.
We continue because, number one, ID Alan Livingston. That's just as important and no more important to me than number 3, number 10, number 20, wherever we may end up at here. We have other families out here that's looking for closure.
The coroner says this positive identification wasn't possible without a DNA comparison sample. That's why he's hoping to reach people across the country with the message of if you have a male friend or family member who went missing in the mid-'80s to '90s, to please take a DNA sample to give to the coroner's office.
Seriously, do it. Even if you're not from the Indiana area, surrounding areas. Please do. There's so many victims. I can't even. 10,000 fragments of bones, femurs, skulls, you name it. All these people, all these lives that he took. And most of them, they don't even know who they are. So, yeah, if you're in this area, surrounding area, you think, well, maybe, no, couldn't be. Just do it. Seriously, you never know. You could be helping somebody too, as well. You know what I mean?
He says if it isn't a match here, he will make sure it gets into a national database. Reporting at Fox
Yes.
Hollow Farm, I'm Rachel Wilkerson, WRTV. Rachel also spoke with Livingston's mother today, and she says she's thankful for closure. The remains of 11 men
Oh,
were found on the property in 1996. 9 of them have now been identified. The new owner of the Fox Hollow Farm property spoke to us today, saying he expects more activity to happen in the future. In December, when the Indy Canine
so this is Robert Graves. I'm reading his book right now.
Search and Rescue came out, they did mark an additional 20 spots in the woods that were potential spots for other human remains. And I believe there is some plans to come back out and dig in those spots. Graves is hoping the renewed interest in the case leads to more positive identifications. Just last month, WRTV aired an extensive special shining a light on the renewed effort to identify the unnamed victims. You can watch WRTV Presents Forgotten at Fox Hollow, the victims of an Indiana serial killer right
I want to
now.
watch that.
It is on our website, WRTV.com. Look for the Forgotten graphic on the home page. It is also available on our WRTV YouTube channel.
Alrighty, now I'll read the book. This one's called Bones. After the police visited Herb at his store, he told his wife that a disgruntled former employee was harassing him by making false claims to the police and that they both needed to be very careful. This was the best explanation that he could come up with for the police questioning him. His wife simply figured that having owned his own business for several years, it was not beyond the realm of possibility that this could occur. In the winter of 95, while playing out in the woods behind the house, oh yeah, I forgot about this part. Herb and Jane's son found a human skeleton lying in the undergrowth, located just 50 feet away from the back patio. Can you imagine? You can? Okay. I stopped petting her. The winter of 1995, while playing out in the woods, Herb and Jane's son found a human skeleton lying in the undergrowth, located just 50 feet away from their back patio. As most young lads would probably do, the boy took great delight in putting the skull on the end of a long stick and using it to scare his sisters. Their mother soon got word of this and demanded to know where exactly he had found it. When he told her that it had been lying around out in the woods, she insisted upon being taken to that spot. Jane was taken to the spot, and sure enough, there was a set of very human-looking bones. She would later describe it as looking as though somebody just lain down there and died. Shocked at her son's discovery, she was more than a little anxious to ask Herb about it when he came home later that night. He should have called the police lady. The minute he walked through the door, she immediately asked, "What the hell is this?" Recovering from the sudden shock of being confronted with the evidence of his crimes, Herb very quickly dismissed it as being his father's old anatomical skeleton, a holdover from his dad's medical practice. It had been in the garage until recently. Herb reassured her, and while he was not sure exactly how it got out there in the woods beyond the farm, he would be only too happy to get rid of it. Wow. When Jane went back out there a week later, true to his word, the skeleton was gone. She didn't have to work too hard to find his account believable. After all, Herb collected anything and everything, and he threw nothing away. He was a real pack rat. She wrote it off as simply her being Herb, and asked no further questions, which was unfortunate. Because had Jane ventured into the woods behind Fox Hollow Farm, she would have found that there were many more bodies still waiting to be discovered. Detective Marcia Warren was not making any progress with the investigation, and she was fast running out of options. She ultimately decided to approach Miss Baumeister regarding her suspicions and asked for permission to search the property. Jane Baumeister was listed on the deed, after all, and could legally provide the necessary authorization to the search. Marcia drove to the second Save-A-Lot store that Jane ran, located on the north side of Indianapolis. She asked an employee if she could speak with Mrs. Baumeister. Jane soon appeared and asked what she could do for Marcia. Marcia explained that she was investigating the disappearances of several men from Indianapolis, and she felt that Herb might be involved somehow. Would it be permissible for her to search the Baumeister property? Jane was understandably taken aback and quite visibly shaken. She protested that she had been married to Herb for 25 years and that her husband had never put so much as a bruise on her, even by accident. What the detective was claiming made absolutely no sense to her whatsoever. Although she must have had her suspicions concerning her husband's behavior, reinforced with the finding of the bones behind Fox Hollow Farm, she nevertheless brushed the police officer off with, "Get some proof and then I will be more than happy to give you a guided tour." But until such a time as a valid search warrant appeared, Jane was just not going to cooperate. That evening, Jane told Herb about the visit. Dismissively, he brushed it off by claiming that it was all because of a vindictive employee who was out to get him. Despite the portrayal of a happy family life that Herb and Jane were putting on for their benefit of the children and the outside world beneath the surface, the first cracks in the idyllic facade were beginning to form. Life at Fox Hollow Farm was becoming increasingly difficult for the Baumeisters. Bill payments had also fallen behind. Their businesses were not going well, and Herb and Jane's relationship was beginning to falter. So much so, in fact, that Jane ultimately filed for divorce. Herb had moved into the on-site apartment that was built onto the side of the main house. It had a separate entrance and living area and was meant for in-laws and other visitors to stay in. Now it was the new home of the master of the house himself. It's not difficult to see why both Herb and Jane were beginning to feel the strain. After all, peace of mind is hard to come by when the electricity bill hasn't been paid in some time and the mortgage is also past due. Shit, I actually have to pay my electricity bill. Oh my god, I forgot. Yeah, on top of all of this, there was something darker. Always present at the back of Jane's mind was the skeleton that her son had found out in the woods behind the house. Something about Herb's story and his increasingly frequent mood swings nagged at her. She began to experience a change of heart. Doubtless feeling that her life was unraveling a little bit more with every day that passed, she called her lawyer and relayed what information she had about her husband, saying that she was now ready to cooperate with police. There had to have been something besides that skeleton. I mean, there had to have been signs for her to say that, you know what I mean? Herb was away at a lake condominium with their son, and so Jane felt that was an opportune time for the police to come out and search the property. Because the Baumeister property lies in Hamilton County and the missing persons were from Marion County, the Hamilton County Sheriff was duly notified. The sheriff sent a detective to meet with Jane and her attorney at Fox Hollow Farm. The detective was aware of the ongoing investigation into Herb Baumeister's possible involvement with the missing Indianapolis men. As with the Indianapolis Police Department, the Hamilton County Sheriff had little to go on other than informed speculation. After having spoken with Jane for a short time in the kitchen of Fox Hollow Farm, during which conversation she related the story of the skeleton incident to the detective. He directed her to show him exactly where her son had made that find. Jane, accompanied by her lawyer and the detective, went straight out the back door of the house and escorted the two men right to that spot. Although the area was only about 50 feet from the back of the house, it was heavily wooded, perfectly screened off from prying eyes. "This is the spot," Jane said. All three of them scanned the undergrowth. At first glance, nothing seemed too obviously amiss. Oh, then a bone was spotted. And another. And another. Much to their surprise, a number of teeth were visible, scattered all around the area among the grass and the weeds. As the three of them looked a little more closely, more bones of assorted shapes and sizes began to turn up. At this point, the detective was beginning to grow concerned. "You think?" He was unable to say whether the bones were of human origin. After all, the area was home to a large animal population, and the bones might easily be from deer or coyotes. A call was therefore made to the Hamilton County prosecutor, asking her to come out and give her recommendation on how best they should proceed. The county prosecutor soon arrived at the farm and was immediately shown the bones. Like the detective, she was unsure whether the bones were human or not, and stated this could perhaps be an Indian burial ground. Another call was made, this time to the forensic anthropologist who had previously suggested the aerial survey. When he arrived on the scene, he took one look at the bones and stated with the utmost confidence that not only were they human bones, but they had also recently been deposited there. Fox Hollow Farm was now officially a crime scene. Jane immediately told the detective that she wanted him to fetch her son, who was still at the lake condo with his father. She was now more concerned than ever that Herb was unstable, and she wanted her son by her side so that she could protect him from the storm she knew with certainty must be coming. The detective sent some deputies to retrieve the boy. Arriving at the condominium, they knocked on the door. Herb answered, and it was explained to him that Jane wanted her son to be with her due to the divorce proceedings. The young man was rightfully upset at being taken away from his father by law enforcement, but Herb was far too canny to make an issue of it. Although no mention was made of the bones being found at Fox Hollow Farm and no questions were asked by the police about the unsettling findings, Herb was all too aware of what lay there, just waiting to be found in the woods behind his home. From the moment he first set eyes on the uniformed deputies, he knew that the game would soon be up. What I never understood is he was he was disgusting. Like, he would take the bodies, or I would assume full bodies. I guess we'll figure out more reading this book, but all these bones were visible to everyone. He was very careless about it, like he wanted to get caught. When the deputies arrived back at the farm with her son, the first question Jane asked them was, "Where's Herb?" Between the sheriff and the prosecutor, it was determined that more evidence was needed before they could pick him up. There was an understandable tendency to disbelieve that something so horrific could be going on in such a respectable, prestigious part of town. Couple that with the fact that Herb had never really been in trouble with the law, and the authorities soon realized that the case against Baumeister wasn't nearly as open and shut as it might have seemed at first glance. The big fear was that Herb's attorney would have asked for a speedy trial. In Indiana, that meant that the trial would have to occur within just 70 days. There was simply not enough evidence available to charge him with anything concrete with what they had at the time. Incredibly, it was all circumstantial. How? How many different pieces of bones did they find of different remains of different men? Like, what? And how is that fair? They have 70 days to come up with everything, or that's it. Like, really? A lot of these laws need to friggin' change. Wow. Despite the sheer volume of human remains that had been discovered at Fox Hollow Farm, there was no definitive proof linking those bones to Herb. How you figure? Sorry. Prosecutors felt that he would have a good chance of walking free if they acted too quickly. The forensic anthropologist set up a grid pattern with which to search the land immediately behind the house, focusing on the section in which the skeleton had been found. The area appeared to contain mostly fragments of bone, intermingled with an assortment of human teeth. The bone fragments were less than an inch in size, and most appeared to have been burned. The killer, they theorized, was burning the bones in an attempt to hide his crimes. The murderer has also played a particularly cruel trick on the investigators. The victims were not buried, but rather had been placed in the woods and allowed to decompose. Once that was done, they were doused with gasoline and then burned in order to further disguise them. He's a sick fuck. Animals had dragged the remains all over the wooded area behind the house and beyond, scattering them far and wide. The forensic anthropology team spent a week within the grid search area, cataloging first hundreds and then ultimately thousands of bone fragments. The search was scheduled to conclude at the end of the week. On the last day, just as they were packing up their equipment, the forensic team was questioned by two teenagers who worked on the farm next door. The kids asked them what they were looking for. "This is a crime scene," they replied, "and we are looking for human remains." "You mean bones and stuff like that?" the teenagers asked. When the police said yes, the teens told them that all the bones are in the creek. Apparently, it was well known by all the kids in the area that there was a lot of bones just lying around in the creek. None had looked to be human to the children, so they had naturally assumed that they were animal bones. It was not until law enforcement arrived that somebody pointed out that those bones might possibly be human. Holy crap. The forensic anthropologist took his team over to the west side of the property where the creek was located. Looking all around him, he was shocked by the sheer number of bones to be found in the creek bed. To his trained eye, all of them appeared to be human. A multitude of ribs, spinal columns, femurs, and almost any other type of bone you could care to name. His first thought was to wonder just how many people lay scattered all around him. He said that it looked like a bomb went off in a people factory. The bones led all the way up the side of the ravine from where the creek was too large pile of debris and the very western edge of the property. The pile consisted of everything you would find in a yard: leaves, branches, grass clippings, and so forth. The police would come to call it the mulch pile. It appeared that the killer was placing the dead bodies of his victims in the mulch pile and then covering them up with debris. The animals in the area would then pull the bodies apart piece by piece, dragging them down into the creek. This appeared to have gone on for several years, so far as the doctor and his colleagues could tell. The forensic team was due to have left that day. Instead, they now had to spend an additional 3 weeks excavating the creek, inch after painstaking inch. The prevailing theory was that the pile was the first area used for disposal of the victims. As time went on, either out of sheer laziness or arrogance, because he had not yet been caught, the killer began placing the bodies closer and closer to his house itself, until finally the closest sets of remains lay just 50 feet of the back door. The FBI profiler who was consulted stated that many serial killers that have a long history of success often tend to become emboldened and start taking chances that they would not have dreamed of taking at the beginning of their killing career. So often, it is complacency that gets them caught. All in all, 5,500 bones and bone fragments were found in the two areas combined. The forensic anthropologist identified 11 first metacarpal bones that all came from left hands. By definition, that meant that there were at least 11 hands, and therefore a minimum of 11 victims. The odds were good that they were more than 11 victims, perhaps many more. In order to even try to identify any of those victims, DNA samples would need to be taken from their close family members. DNA testing in 1996 was very expensive and still fairly rare. The cost per sample was $1,200 and had to be paid personally rather than by the authorities, which meant that a family member would need to come up with that considerable sum of money in order to test their DNA against any of the bones that had been found at the farm. That's bullshit. An effort by the anthropology team to reduce the cost was successful enough to get it down to $650 per test. That's insane. A significant reduction, but still beyond the means of many people. In total, the remains of some 8 individuals were identified. Due to the large number of bones and bone fragments, the estimate was given that the total number of victims at the farm probably ranged anywhere from 17 to 20. Wow. Perhaps unsurprisingly, nobody came forward to say that their loved one was probably among the missing, that they requested a test of their DNA against the bones that had been discovered. Most of the victims were transients and had little connection to the city of Indianapolis. That was exactly why Herb Baumeister had targeted them. He had known that when they went missing, the chances were high that nobody would come looking for them. At that time, the Fox Hollow Farm murder case was the largest of its type in the United States and was the only case handled from start to finish by a board-certified forensic anthropologist. At the time, there were only 25 certified forensic anthropologists operating the entire country. Fortunately, one of them just happened to be a resident at the University of Indianapolis. The case grew to such prominence that it became the focus of a master's degree thesis at that same university. While the investigation was still going on, one of the investigating officer's spouses is believed to have leaked news to the media about the findings at Fox Hollow Farm. Herb was still at the lake condo and just happened to see it on the local news. Idiots. Now he knew with absolute certainty that the game was finally up. There could be no going back. His life had spiraled so badly out of control that he saw no other option but to flee. After packing up a few things, Herb drove his gray Buick north, passing through Detroit and crossing the border into Canada, stopping just long enough to phone his brother and ask him to wire him some money. Partway through his long drive into Canada, Herb pulled over to the side of the road and stopped to sleep for a while in his car, which he parked beneath an overpass bridge. A Canadian mounted police officer woke him, knocking on the window and telling Herb that he couldn't stop there as it wasn't safe. While glancing into the backseat of the car, the Mountie noticed a large quantity of videotapes. In and of itself, that wasn't particularly suspicious, and the officer had no reason to detain Herb further or to search his car. Nothing more was said, and so Herb drove away. One can't help but wonder just what was on those tapes and what was so important that Herb Baumeister felt he should take them with him, when almost everything else of value he was left behind. It has been theorized by some that he may have videotaped the murders using hidden video cameras, in which case he may have been disposing of the evidence. We will probably never know, as the whereabouts of those tapes remains unknown at the time of writing. Although a significant number of VHS tapes were confiscated from the basement of Fox Hollow Farm during the murder investigation, one of the police officers tasked with the chore of watching them all said dryly that he had never watched so many episodes of the TV show Dallas in his entire life. Eventually, Herb found his way to Pinery Provincial Park, which lies on the shores of Lake Huron. Choosing a beautifully scenic spot, he made his way over to his sandy picnic area that was close to the water and sat down. Taking out a pen, he composed a suicide letter, in which he apologized for leaving his family in financial ruin and for making what would soon be an ugly mess at such a beautiful spot. In a strange turn of events, the man who had murdered an untold number of young men and disposed of their bodies in the most brutal manner now went out of his way to point out in the letter that he had only loaded one single bullet into the gun so that if a child happened to wander along and find it after Herb had killed himself, they would not accidentally harm themselves. How fucking thoughtful. The prolific serial killer who thought nothing of killing vulnerable young men would also balk at the possibility of harming a child. Apparently, there were depths to which even he was not prepared to sink. Herb ended the note by writing that he was going to eat a peanut butter sandwich and then go to sleep. Of the numerous murders he has committed, Herb wrote that not a word. In what may have been a sly acknowledgement of his impending post-mortem fame, Herb signed the note, "The Herb Baumeister," then set the paper down carefully and took out his gun, placing the barrel against his forehead. He pulled the trigger. So thanks to that idiot cop, whoever it was that leaked that info to the news, Herb got away, and now no one will ever know what was on those tapes or how many of those people were taken, their lives that were taken. There are some conflicting stories about the way he was found. The first person to discover Herb's body claimed that there was no gun found on the scene at all. This was directly contradicted by the Hamilton County Sheriff's Department, who stated that they had collected the gun from the Canadian authorities. Strangely, they had been compelled to leave their own service guns at the border when they entered the country, but they had absolutely no trouble bringing the suicide weapon back into the United States. They also collected Herb's car after the Canadians had finished their investigation and returned to Indiana. To this day, stories and myths about concerning Herb's death scene, some of them reaching the status of urban legend. Some have claimed that he was found in the center of an occult symbol that was drawn in the sand, surrounded by the bodies of several dead birds. Ghost Adventures Zach Bagan, oh, he's a piece of shit too, theorized on the TV show that Herb's death was nothing less than an occult ritual. Of course he did. One designed to give his spirit some kind of power in the afterlife. Zach, you're canceled. Go away. I'm sorry, I don't like Zach Bagans at all. Others have claimed that Herb didn't actually kill himself at all, but rather was forced to write his own suicide note at gunpoint before somebody else, a shadowy accomplice in the murders, they say, fired the fatal shot. I've heard a lot of different things about the way he passed, or even if he did pass, that he's still alive. Back in Indiana, Jane Baumeister and her children were still living at Fox Hollow Farm. And early that morning, she had received a call from her lawyer who relayed the news that her husband had been found dead on a beach in Canada. The cause of death was a single self-inflicted gunshot, and all the evidence pointed toward suicide. Naturally, she and the children were devastated by all accounts. Herb had been a doting father and a good provider to the family, weren't they victims in this big tragic mess too? Shortly afterward, Jane Baumeister and her children moved back into another house that she still owned in Indianapolis. Fox Hollow Farm was duly returned to the owners, those who had sold the property on contract to the Baumeisters in the first place. Although police were never able to definitively prove that Herb Baumeister had killed the men whose remains had turned up in the woods behind Fox Hollow Farm, there were no other credible suspects in that case. At the time of writing, which was 2019, there are still none. Another chilling theory, and one that seems quite plausible, is that Herb was responsible for the series of killings in which the bodies of several young men were found dumped along various roadsides in Indiana and Ohio during the 10-year period between 1980 and 1990. With the benefit of hindsight, we now know that he would have not only the means, but also the opportunity to commit those crimes. The victims had come from Indianapolis and had been strangled to death. As these murders predated disappearances from Indianapolis gay bars, whose victims would end up at Fox Hollow Farm. It seems very feasible to speculate that the earlier murders were a case of a serial killer cutting his teeth in the early days of his career. It is likely that, as he got away with murder after murder, Herb Baumeister became increasingly lax and overconfident, which is why he would finally become comfortable killing his victims in the basement of his own home. The story should really have ended there, with Herb Baumeister's death. Although this unfortunately allowed him to evade capture by the authorities and avoid the consequences of his crimes, at the very least, the book would have been closed on the horrific and tragic events that took place at Fox Hollow Farm while he lived there. Instead, Herb's apparent suicide wasn't even close to being the end of the story. More was still to come. All right, you guys, you have a good night. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the comments.